Yeah, there's a thread that you're weaving through this conversation, uh, really distinguishing studios as a new and better methodology for building ventures. And I just want to double click on that. And then you kind of touched on it in terms of the cost of capital, the cost of coding and throwing up a website, perhaps developing some early traction with customers. But in your opinion, what really, in terms of developing the venture itself, we've talked around the edges about the macro trends for creating new startups, but double clicking on the actual venture creation itself, what do you think distinguishes the venture creation process inside of a studio that is advantageous over the other methodologies and structures that we've talked about as well?
Totally. So the first thing I like to say is it has to do with team and the people involved. So we can look at some historical stories and just landscape functions or factors that play into this pretty well. Over the last decade, let's say, what was the typical archetype of a startup founder? It was typically a white dude from San Francisco who got together with his roommates from Stanford, and they built a startup together. And those startups typically looked like a mobile app that you could send photos to your friends that might disappear in a few seconds. Or with the click of a button, you could have alcohol delivered to your door. And while that's awesome and fun and cool, that doesn't cure cancer. That doesn't cure climate change. That doesn't cure insert difficult problem here, right? And so now we're at a point where pretty much all the luxury, nice knickknacks, all the nice to haves have been solved. Like, name it. You name a problem, name a solution, it's been done. And someone somewhere, likely from Silicon Valley, has made a couple $100 million off of that. And that's awesome. But now we're at a point where there are much more difficult issues that are pressing. Like I mentioned, climate change, cancer, mental health, depression, addiction, all kinds of problems. The issue, though, that still arises, that still lives on, is that the best suited person to solve those problems, or the best suited team of people, very likely is not a white guy in his early to mid 20s from Silicon Valley getting together with his college roommates from Stanford. It looks like a whole different type of people. So what we believe in the studio world is studios need to be the middleman or the glue between multiple types of organizations and entities. Some of the best studios that are popping up right now have relationships with governments, universities, hubs of entrepreneurs that are often these days focused on underrepresented entrepreneurs that are not from these Silicon Valleys of the world. And they basically, studios act as the, like I said, the middleman to mobilize the smartest minds from each of those groups. So imagine if you can get the top researcher on climate change, two of the top climate tech entrepreneurs, and some government capital, and then combine all those people and that money with a system on how to build a great startup in 90 days. And if it fails, or something in that process fails, we kill it and move on to the next. You're going to end up with something probably pretty impactful and interesting. And from a return standpoint, we're talking about some pretty interesting numbers. Again, we can get into those if we'd like. So first piece right off the bat is the team itself, who actually comes together to launch a studio, is really, really powerful. The next thing then is it's all about the stage gates and the playbook. And at a studio, because let's say the goal is to hit 4 startups, get 4 startups a year out of the door and into the wild. Well, then that means if you do very basic math, that's 1 startup per quarter. How do we build a company and get it to seed in 3 months? Well, you're going to need a very tight system, almost like a factory would create widgets on an assembly belt. You do the same with startups. And that means, okay, for days 1 through 14, we do this, and we seek to hit these goals, these metrics. If we don't succeed at that, kill it, move on to the next. We have such an abundance of ideas. Like, there's millions of ideas that we all have. Those are cheap and free and abundant. It's our ability to execute on it that's interesting. So great, let's say we succeed after day 14 on these current metrics and goals. Let's move on to the next set of metrics and goals. Did we hit this intended MRR, intended level of tech build, intended level of user acquisition, CAC LTV ratio, stuff like that. And if those numbers are not met, kill it. If they are, keep moving forward, invest more capital. If we don't succeed and move forward, then you stop investing the capital. And so you're not burning as much money. And so using these processes that studios are developing, and most of them look very similar to each other. And a lot of the work I do is helping studios build their own system and process, right? When they combine that team of people and those resources with this system on building startups, we're looking at almost a bulletproof means of solving problems. We would create widgets on an assembly belt. You do the same with startups. And that means, okay, for days 1 through 14, we do this, and we seek to hit these goals, these metrics. If we don't succeed at that, kill it, move on to the next.